Okay, good evening. We're going to get started. If you want to get your beverages and have a seat, please. Thank you. Thanks for coming tonight. I'm Christine Gerlach, the Executive Administrative Coordinator here at the Jefferson. It's my pleasure to kick off tonight's event, but first I'll do three things. Go over some housekeeping reminders, tell you about upcoming events, and introduce our presenter. First, the housekeeping. If you need assistance during the event, please find one of our volunteers who will be happy to help you. Some reminders for the Q&A portion. After the presentation, we ask that you raise your hand and wait for the microphone to come to you before asking your question. And please keep those questions brief and concise. Refrain from offering any lengthy statements. Some upcoming events. Tomorrow at 6, one of our scholars in residence, Dr. Paris Baker, will speak at the Corey Higher Education Council exploring, does the church have a place in today's politics? Thursday, February 27th at 7, Dr. Carlene Cho will be here to discuss common vascular problems and treatments available. This program is in partnership with LECOM Health. For Friday, our community conversation lunch, we welcome Karen Billowith, who will present the Erie Community Foundation, celebrating 90 years of investment and impact. And finally, I would like to introduce you to our presenter and newest scholar in residence, Dr. Lena Surzhko-Harned. She is an associate teaching professor of political science and associate director of the Public Policy Fund at Penn State Behrend. Her research focuses on comparative politics, including nationalism, ethnic conflict, identity politics, and democratization in the post-communist Eastern Europe. She has published several papers and co-authored the 2017 book, Post-Soviet Legacies and Conflicting Values in Europe, Generation Y, which explores intergenerational conflict in Ukraine and Russia. Let's give her a warm JES welcome.
Thank you all very much. Again, I always am very happy to speak to this audience. Can you hear me now? Okay, awesome. All right, so again, thank you very much. I'm always happy to speak to this audience, even though the occasion of my talk today and the topic is less than pleasant. Also, in happy news, other happy news that not to do with bad news that I'm going to discuss with you today, my second book is going to see the light of day before the end of this year. And it's entitled Ruski Mir, Russian World versus European Values, 10 Years of Decolonization of Ukraine. So hopefully it will give some insights on the story of the invasion. Thank you very kindly. So as I was on my way here, I was thinking how to even, I wondered how to begin this entire day today. And then just before the introduction, I opened news, and Washington Post has the following headline: Trump, Macron meet as US backs Russia over Ukraine in UN vote. May we live in interesting times. We definitely are in interesting times. 3 years of war, 3 years of supposed to be 3-day special military operation. And we seem to be going through a very interesting moment in international world order, something that I think, I hate to be that person, but I warned you about. To be a comparativist in this day and age. So my colleague Sergei Plokhy from Harvard actually put it best today as he summed up 3 years of war. And I thought I'd start right there, following my headline. 3 years of war, Ukraine is standing, US is failing. Again, this is Sergei's take, and we can argue that this is a normative take, but US is definitely changing. US foreign policy seems to be changing. The narrative seems to be changing. So today I thought we can explore a little bit about what those changes are and maybe why, and what are the consequences of them. Again. Oh, no, not at all. What we live in through are interesting times. Just last week I was reminded once again of this image I was talking to a journalist and actually the editor of a commissioned piece, and they asked me, well, maybe you can start by comparing the images of Ukraine. And I'm like, well, you know, nothing speaks volumes than these two magazine covers, 3 years apart, 2.5 years apart. So in December of 22, when Time magazine proclaimed Zelensky and Spirit of Ukraine the person of the year, versus Der Spiegel last week with their one word, and I don't know if you speak German, but that says betrayed. Yeah, same men, 2.5 years apart, different message altogether. And there's a very different message, a different image, right, that has been very much in the news lately and receiving a lot of attention. Why is it that all of a sudden the rhetoric from the current president of the United States and the current administration has been so different? But before we go to that rhetoric, which again I will talk about and I want to explore it a little bit more, I thought we can talk about the state of war, the realities of 3 years on. Again, what started as 3-day special military operation did not pan out into 3-day military operation. It's an important testament to many things, including the punchline of many of the arguments that I'm going to be making today of reality as it's being sold, and reality is what it is, and the reality in which certain political leaders live versus what reality really is are very different things. Two, that one imperialist dictator has underestimated Ukrainians, and I hope that's not going to be repeated again, even though it seems to be on a track for that. In terms of the realities and the numbers, Washington Post this morning had this piece in numbers, right, recapping the war and the situation on the ground, stating, for instance, the 10.6 displaced Ukrainians, million of displaced Ukrainians that account for both internally displaced and those who have been claiming a refugee status outside of Ukraine. Out of those 10.6, 6.9 are approximately abroad. It's very important to also remind you that that number of refugees abroad in the first year of war was 12 million. What happened to the rest of them? They went back. I can tell you also, if you're curious why, we can talk about the Q&A. I have one of those of my own that was here in Erie and left last summer to go home. 20% of territory occupied, that's a lot. If you remember, however, what that number looked like in 2022, that was higher. And the fact that even now, to this day, what was supposed to be Kyiv in 3 days, we're still at 20%. It's okay. It sucks. It could be worse. What's awful and what's never redeemable is the amount of life lost. And yeah, here again, numbers that are being thrown by administration willy-nilly are far from reality. But I also can tell you that that number that the UN throws around is also far from reality. That's what they counted, that's what they can account for. According to, of course, the city of Mariupol alone, that number is at least 5 times higher in that city alone. So, again, those are confirmed by the UN. What we also know, and what is daily reality, are daily attacks on civilian infrastructure. And another reality is that 2 days ago, on the night of the 22nd to 23rd of February, Ukraine had the most massive attack by drones and ballistics. I'll revisit that point a little bit later, and that reality. Also, another reality about, I didn't even include to you the number of imprisoned, but very important point, of approximately 20,000 children taken into Russia by Ukrainian accounts. Amazingly, Russian reports are way higher. In one of the reports, Lvova Belova, who is now the co-criminal with Vladimir Putin and wanted in Hague for the same crime, she's his ombudsman for children. She claimed 70,000. I mean, good for them. Keep reporting. Keep recording. We're keeping track too. Just like when, I'm getting ahead of myself, but I'm gonna just throw it out there. Just when Foreign Minister of Russia says, "Oh, we never attacked civilian infrastructure. We never ever targeted power plants or energy infrastructure." Well, maybe don't let your propaganda run around on state media reporting just how much damage you have done gleefully, because internet remembers that too. Just saying. All right, on the other side, again, I threw just a couple of things. Reality also is that Kursk is occupied by Ukrainian armed forces. I'll come back to that too, as in reality and its implications. Because nuclear power, red lines, we can't provoke it. So scary. Don't invade, don't strike inside it. Well, it's been occupied since August. Nothing's been done about it, despite the fact that, Russia continues to send its own troops and now involving North Korean military in there, but that still is a reality. Also, there are continued target attacks on military targets and oil refineries. That's also a reality of war now. The Russian propaganda doesn't talk much about that, though. Also, close to 100,000 Russian troops have seen the maker as a result of this war. Ukrainians have lost too, tremendously, horrifically, and some of their best. And those are the realities. That's the state of war. Another reality that we have to deal with is now this change in rhetoric in the United States, or is it really a change in foreign policy? For years and years, we were told, for a number of months now at least, the prevailing argument has been, no, don't listen what Trump says, listen what he does, or look at what he does. But the words are concerning. I just pulled some gems for you over the last week. So, of course, President Trump has claimed that Zelensky is a dictator without elections. He had 3 years to end it. He should not have ever started it. My favorite, another one, they don't have any cards, but they play tough. We're not going to let this continue. And referring to, of course, Ukrainians refusing to sign his mineral agreement the first time. Vice President Vance, of course, went on to say, well, just say thank you and stop complaining about not being invited to the negotiating tables. Hexet, of course, our new defense secretary, has also said that there are certain realistic things and unrealistic and pragmatic things. Again, I'm a big fan of the word realism lately, as you probably noticed, right? That it seems in some people's world, what they call realism is a magical world of nothing that has to do with reality. But okay, I'll come back to that. So anyway, so not realistic NATO, not realistic to return the territories, concessions on both ends, okay. And of course Musk, I mean, come on, I know he's not elected, but somehow has a lot of power lately, and his words have a lot of power. And of course, recently at CPAC, he asked, what are Ukrainians dying for? What exactly are they dying for, he demanded. I have many answers for Mr. Musk. But anyhow, he also then claims, right, that Russia went on for 3 years. He went too far 3 years ago, but now Ukrainian government has gone too far. Endless death in trenches is wrong, and anyone who continues to push that lack both empathy and brain. Cool. Brainiac, empathetic self. All right, so for a long time, right, again, as a political scientist, I can also tell you, rhetoric is rhetoric, policy is policy. And for the most part, again, as someone who studies public opinion and impact of rhetoric on behavior, it matters. But at the same time, right, I can draw that line of saying, okay, we can maybe give leeway to harsh rhetoric at times of negotiations, at pushing the agenda, of creating the so-called fog of war. Not that you need more when the real war is going on, but creating this fog of uncertainty to strike when the iron is hot. Someone actually had a really interesting take on that. Actually, a Russian analyst once said, a Russian opposition analyst, because I had to draw the line here, right? The liberal opposition in exile, right? And so I listen to them too. I have to. You don't have to, I do. So their analysis was, well, you know, remember how Bolton said that they're celebrating what's going on in Moscow, right? And they celebrating this meeting and the phone call, and they drinking vodka straight out of the bottle. And this analyst said, well, that's the whole point. Get them drunk. Because remember, after they drink enough, there comes a moment of hangover, and that's when he's gonna strike, when they nice and hungover. I mean, right? I mean, the analogy is there, right? Get Russians to accept this, and this is like part of negotiating tactic to make everybody's blood down, to get Russians to negotiate, and it's actually genius. Okay, I can buy that to a point. Today. Do you know what this is today? Didn't follow the news today? Yeah, so two resolutions went on, and this was Ukrainian resolution in UN Security, I mean, in UN General Assembly, condemning Russian aggression. Check out how United States voted. For the first time, and as long as I remember, Russia, North Korea, and the United States of America vote the same and are in a minority on a resolution condemning Russian aggression in Ukraine. Not even abstention, a no. That's not rhetoric anymore. So yeah, a little concerning, just a little bit, of what this might actually entail and what does it mean. And I think it's safe to say that we are in a brave new world, officially, and something quite unprecedented, perhaps in some ways, since World War II, for certain, in which the language, the implications, the rhetoric, the policy, all pointing in the same direction. So, again, thinking back to the meeting in Riyadh between the United States and the Russian delegation, following that very complimentary phone call between the two presidents. Cool. Okay, we can say, is this really a huge turnaround in American foreign policy? Oh, come on, right? Like that is actually not that new. I mean, do you guys remember when Hillary went with her button, the red button, to meeting with Lavrov, and they did the whole reset and they were actually pushing the damn button? I should have put a picture on that just to remind you, because that happened too. And then, you know, so many American administrations have attempted to reset relationship with Russia. Furthermore, I have news for you. Maybe not. In 2019, when Zelensky was first elected, he also was convinced, like totally convinced, that he can look Putin in the eye and they're going to stop shooting and we're all going to live forever happy ever after. So, okay, so another reset. Okay, fine, cool. Another reset. We've been there, done that to various degrees of success with Putin. Not so success, but cool. Okay, so another reset. And that's kind of how that meeting was sold to American audiences, right? I mean, if you listen to what they agreed to continue agreeing. Well, that was, you know, I deliberately went and revisited my notes from my lecture that I gave to this very audience in this very room in 2018 after Helsinki reset. And I was like, oh, look, they agreed to keep talking. Woohoo! Okay, so, okay. Fine, keep talking. Okay, lads, more power to you. The interesting part about all of this were two quotes that totally kind of made things a little different than maybe some other resets. One was this quote from Rubio about ending the war, unlocking the door to incredible opportunities. Again, as someone who studies foreign policy and is familiar with that magical theory of realism, okay, cool. So there is this whole idea about linkages, about understanding issues and how issues are related, right? And we've seen that before in USSR, US relations, where by focusing on low-hanging fruit, you can build trust and find solutions to bigger problems. Okay. That's not low-hanging fruit, though, and I will tell you why in just a sec. Another concerning story is that Lavrov said a very telling thing. We not only listened, but heard each other. Heard each other. They heard, and now they're repeating. And that's what the concerning thing is, right? That a lot of rhetoric now coming from Rubio, Mr. Trump himself, his administration, Hexet, who say that, you know, we're not going to call it a war, it's a conflict. And when Mr. Hexet is asked on Fox News by a very perceptive journalist, right, the host, when she says, well, Russia attacked Ukraine, and he's like, well, things are complicated. Cool. That's exactly what Russian propaganda, what Russian state, forget propaganda, what the Kremlin has been saying for the last 10 years. Things are complicated. So, black is white, war is peace. And here we are. But a reminder, right? Who here is a dictator? And there's certain facts, again, that you and I know, that world knows, and important to continue to remind that there are facts, and there are facts, and there are facts, and there are facts, regardless of how you want to, what kind of acrobatics you want to engage in. Okay, so what does it tell us about foreign policy? I hear so much and heard so much about this realism time and again. Strength is power, right? So in the theories of international relations, there are sort of two prominent theories. Realism, that places huge emphasis on state power, and that power is measured in a number of ways, like coercive power or soft power, right? And power, of course, the ability to make others do what they wouldn't otherwise do. And realism says that, right, powerful states, because they possess that power, get to wield the world. So, right, it's the great power politics argument. So, okay, peace through strength, leadership through power, that's the argument in foreign policy that's been sort of sold for the last, through election, through the campaign, through the months coming up to inauguration. And we again told that there's something unique in the hands of Trump's presidency that was not at the hands of his predecessor, even though arguably, right, the office of the President of the United States possesses same tools and powers in foreign policy. But somehow, okay, this particular president has something more. And only he, just he, can resolve this problem. With still realism also, and probably the most vivid example of foreign policy in realist perspective is also this Kissingerian style diplomacy, right? Where you have bilateral negotiations, leaving out the noise, personal relationship between negotiators, building those elements of strength, again, creating linkages between issues, and trying to find solutions to more difficult problems by focusing first on the low-hanging fruit and exercising, then working toward bigger solutions by starting into those smaller relationships. Okay, so when Mr. Hexet goes on and again says that we're not going to say who's to blame, it's impractical, and I wish my memory was better right now to quote you exactly what he said. But right, the idea was it's impractical, it's not solving any, it's not productive, that's the word he used, it's not productive, who started what, it's how we finish it. So the president wants peace, we're going to focus on peace. Okay, cool. Okay, I'll buy that realism. Also, you can think about back to classics of realism, and I tell my students that all the time. I bring Machiavelli as sort of one of the classical perspectives on realism, rather, in Enlightenment literature and Enlightenment philosophy. And of course, Machiavelli's idea was this approach about keeping details of foreign policy secret, right? We'll wait and see. Okay, cool. Don't tell anybody what your plan is. I can respect that. Fine. Awesome. Let's see what you deliver on this. At the end, no argument here. Good work. There are some problems, though, that are kind of glaring in some ways. Again, that might not necessarily speak to each one of my elements, but here's the thing, right? Just magical realism. This magical realism is it coming back to. Russia did not start the war. It did. Both sides of the conflict are to blame. I don't know about that. Evidence and reality seem to point in some other directions. Putin wants peace. I categorically have to say that that has no basis in reality. Furthermore, to be cunning, one has to have a nuanced understanding of the issue. That's how you are cunning. That's Machiavelli. To find solutions to outplay your opponent, you need to understand nuances. I don't know if they are there. I mean, I think on some hand, reality is sitting in that peace in 24 hours was not reality, or 48 hours, or 100 days. And, you know, you need to be able to make deals. You need to understand the linkages between issues. And see point two, you need to understand nuances of the situation. And when we hear things like approval ratings of 4%, and we sort of know where that comes from, where that message comes from, that's not nuanced understanding of the situation. That's evidence of unnuanced understanding of situation. So, yeah. Are we closer to peace than ever before? As again, we've been told today several times by various actors. I'm sorry to say, the answer is no. As a matter of fact, the more I think about it, the more I analyze what I hear and what I see, and I tend to agree with many of my colleagues of the same opinion, that we don't think there is a plan. No, there was a plan. I mean, there was a plan, it just got rejected, hard. And this is why we find ourselves, and this is an explanation for why you're seeing what you're seeing. Okay, so let me do some finesse here with you. Okay, explain how this works. I'm starting to really believe that there was a belief, right? Sorry to be tautological, that it was going to be easy. But here's the thing: we have to understand what the end goal was. I think ceasefire was probably the primary goal. Right? You get people to stop shooting. Woohoo, peace. They're not shooting, they're not dying. And what is most importantly, Ukraine is not in the news anymore. So, victory lap, well deserved. Maybe not Nobel Peace Prize, but with some persuasion, perhaps. The ceasefire would have been a great stopgap, quick solution. And what you needed to do for that, in magical reality, is to get one side and the other side, put them at the negotiating table, knock their heads together. You heard, this was Kellogg's rhetoric in December. They both want peace. They are like fighters caught in the ring, and all they need is a good referee to knock their heads together and get them to see the light of day and stop fighting. The problem with that, though, is that neither side wanted it. Neither side just wanted a ceasefire. And, right, it's understandable. Ukrainians don't want ceasefire because, well, there's no guarantee that Russia just won't attack again, like tomorrow, or in 10 days, or in 100 days, or in 4 years. So this is not a long-term solution. Amazingly, Russians don't want that for very same reason. And not because Ukrainians will attack them, but because they think that Ukrainians will regroup, Ukrainians will get more help, they will rearm, they will create better mobilization, streamline their army, et cetera, right? So they'll also make them stronger, and that's not acceptable either. Besides, to want to cease fire, right, the assumption was that, there's a lot of faulty assumptions, that somehow Putin cares about his loss of life. I mean, that's a lesson that Ukrainians also learned hard. Remember, in the beginning of 2022, I spoke to you in that big audience over there when the war had just begun, the big invasion. And you and I also talked about the possibility of what happens when the Russian mothers start learning about the real losses, right? And there was expectation like, yeah, this is going to be another Afghanistan, right? When 200s are coming back, and what are we fighting for type of thing. Well, that didn't happen. And there's a number of reasons why I think expecting that Putin should care is just a faulty assumption to begin with. And we have several historical evidences for that. And I was just reminded by one of them, by Margaret Thatcher, actually, in her, late Margaret Thatcher's, account of Putin's in his first term of presidency when his Kursk submarine sank, and his reaction. Oh, it drowned. Cool. There's several of such examples. So anyway, so ceasefire based on assumption that somehow, right, there's a need to preserve life was faulty. Also the assumption that Russia would be interested in ceasefire was also might be underpinned by underestimating that Putin understands that for as long as his army attacks and they continue to attack, he has momentum. There's no reason, there's no strategy, there's no strategic reason, no tactical reason to stop. Furthermore, for as long as, and again, this has nothing to do with actual reality, but perception of such, for as long as Putin perceives and thinks that his economy can take it, he will continue. So in terms of how much economic damage there actually is versus Putin's perception to push it further, that's also a calculus that was misguided here. So what has happened, actually, that for Riyadh negotiations, and Fox, God bless him, they actually leaked it before they jumped the gun, right? Because they basically went and said, well, in Riyadh, they agreed to 3-point thing, ceasefire, elections in Ukraine, and then peace talks. And then, of course, Lavrov turns around and says, we have no such agreement. And Russians denied it entirely and completely. And then Fox News had to peddle it, said, well, it was floated. Yeah, it was floated. It was floated because this was the plan. And Russia did not agree to ceasefire. And that's why this plan did not fly. So why ceasefire, election, peace talks? This election piece puzzles a lot of folks, right? Why is it all of a sudden that everybody's so concerned about dictator without election? And why is it that Ukraine did not hold election and so on and so forth? And there's a couple of things, right? Putin doesn't want to negotiate with Zelensky. There's a good reason why he doesn't want to negotiate with Zelensky. I dare say Putin doesn't want to negotiate, period. Right? So it's a catch-22. So why didn't Ukraine have elections? Well, because in 2022, when Russia started shelling the Ukrainian cities, they instituted martial law, and under Ukraine's constitution, elections are forbidden, right? So, to hold elections, there has to be a ceasefire. If there's no ceasefire, there can be no elections. But now we have a seed planted that, and I think this probably began before the whole ceasefire got said, oh no, we don't want ceasefire, right? Before Russians said we don't want ceasefire. Because sort of Putin floated this idea that, well, I'm not going to negotiate with Zelensky because he's not legitimate anyway. So it's a nice opportunity to say, okay, well, you know what, Putin, we have something in common. I don't like Zelensky either. Do I need to remind you why why President Trump does not particularly like President Zelensky? Do you remember that phone call they had in 2019? The one that led to his first impeachment? I mean, yeah, I know, he said we have a good relationship, and come on, Lena, don't be patty. Okay. Fine. Won't be. But let's say that the idea of replacing Zelensky could also have been seen as a carrot to Russia. As in like, okay, so you don't want to negotiate with him, let's replace him. Because we're cool with that too. Like, okay, let's just say that we buy this idea that he overstayed his welcome, that he needs to have elections, right? By the way, bypassing Ukrainian public opinion, the Ukrainian constitution, everything else. Okay, I'm not even going there. But okay, let's say it was like a carrot. We'll replace him, just let's agree to ceasefire. But then, all of a sudden, nope, we don't want no ceasefire. And now we're in this situation that, right, moving forward becomes impossible. Because there's Russians don't recognize this guy as legitimate. And now already United States says, well, this guy is illegitimate. So how do you move forward? And now really you might actually have, to put it bluntly, an out. So let's just agree between us big boys, leave Ukrainians out because they are paying anyway, but now we actually do have a way out of not counting them because we can now show that they are impossible to agree with. Or rather, they are stubborn and they are not ready for negotiations and they are not a valid partner in negotiations. So maybe calling it scapegoat may be going too far. I don't know. You use your own judgments. But it is a way of explaining why that negotiation did not go anywhere and likely will not go anywhere. And there is no really a plan to speak of because the initial plan went belly up. And again, it doesn't take a genius to pressure Ukraine, right? I mean, and this was the case time and time again. And just this morning, again, this very nice journalist asked me that question. Will Ukraine accept? Well, accept what, first of all? And this is the whole point. And secondly, right, this idea that somehow accepting a bilateral agreement that is going to be forced upon Ukrainians, on whom? And remember once again that we are talking about democracy. We are talking about, despite the war, of a robust, politically plural society. As in, despite what you might have heard, there's still a pretty robust Ukrainian opposition. Now, the only difference, right, the banned political actors were those that were openly pro-Russian. Those political parties have been banned. Others who are plenty critical of Zelensky continue to function and speak and continue to function in parliament. Nobody banned them. Right? They continue their infighting, they continue their disagreements. Furthermore, Ukraine continues to this day have a pretty robust civil society. and that civil society has a thing or two to say about Zelensky, and they call him out all the time. I'm going to let you in on a little secret. Ukrainians are not kind to their president, except for when you attack their president. Right? So it's a sort of a remarkable moment that, again, Zelensky understands also that for him to accept any deal that his society will disapprove of, or his military will disapprove of, will cost him dearly in many, many ways. And for Ukrainian society, right, they also recognize and refuse, after they have gained so much and reclaimed with so much blood their own political agency, it's going to be hard for them to accept it. Now, I'm not saying it's impossible, but I told you guys before, Ukrainians will resist, even under occupation. We're just not going to read about it in newspapers. We might not know about thousands and thousands of lives every day lost, blood, torture. We just won't know. It doesn't mean it's not going to happen. But again, the magical reality. I don't see it. It's not happening. So, in some ways, right, this is probably the reason for this change in upping in rhetoric to a degree, and why we're here in this elections business. Another theory, I kind of like that theory, of waking up Europe. Believe me, it needed woken. Not woke, but woken. Before you misquote me. Yeah, there's no doubt here that absolutely European leadership, European project, European capitals needed to act more decisively. And in the last week has been a cold shower for them, and they probably needed more of that cold shower than they bargained for. And now we see in Europe moving in that direction. So today, of course, Monsieur Macron was in White House speaking to President Trump. We know that several European countries already upped their commitments. Britain, despite exiting the European Union, is still a viable and important member of transatlantic partnership and European security. And they have committed and pledged to Ukraine, increased their pledge to Ukraine. They have also believed that they needed to create more pressure on Russia. And of course, in some ways, for European Union, remember, one of the things that Europe needs to consider, and very strongly, and I think they are, is not only their own spending, but what to do with frozen Russian assets, because all the Russian frozen money by sanctions is in Europe, not in the United States. So it's their choice, what they can do and what they need to do. EU today, of course, that's the photographs also from today, on the bottom, Ursula von der Leyen there presiding like Mother Teresa over the meeting of the heads of governments who turned up in Kyiv to talk to Zelensky, including Prime Minister Trudeau and Prime Minister of Spain and Scandinavia. And they also made some commitments and pledges. Spain stepped up also in committing their pledge. So yeah, Europe slowly but surely, but much more has to be done to rethink. And Europe's task right now is much more than just figuring out how to support Ukraine. Their big cold shower is that their structure of North Atlantic Treaty Organization will have to be reconsidered. And the relationship under the auspices of the Washington Agreement will have to be rethought. Okay, in other news, what's up with rare earth minerals? I have no idea. Actually, I do. I'm lying. I do. The thing is that the rare earth mineral whole thing was a Zelensky's idea. It actually was. Yeah, remember, like, when he came here in September? He came with the peace plan, Ukraine's peace plan, and he was floating it by the both candidates, and that was the same trip when he came to Pennsylvania, remember, and then the leadership of the Congress said, "How dare you intervene in our elections, take an invitation from Democratic governor to go to Pennsylvania to visit the factories that making weapons for you." Okay, so that was the same trip. So yeah, there was an element of economic cooperation in that. And here's the thing, at face value, nothing wrong with that. Most Ukrainians don't see anything wrong with that either. Or they didn't until last week. Ukrainian government, at the moment, are on the way of signing this. Right? The initial Zelensky response to refusing to sign when that agreement was brought to him, again, not under the circumstances that was described by President Trump. He did meet with the Secretary of Treasury, he did meet with him and listen to the deal, and his whole proposal was, well, first of all, why is this a New York jurisdiction and not international law? Also, there's certain numbers here that I don't particularly feel comfortable in agreeing to until further discussion is being made and explanation is being made. And now the Ukrainian equivalent in the government is speaking in favor of this idea too, that this is actually a good investment, a possibility to grow Ukrainian economy, to have strong partnership with the United States, to have a buy-in from United States in the long run in Ukrainian growth. Here's the question though. How does this deal provide security guarantees? There is no language, as far as I know, in that agreement that speaks directly to security guarantees. It's an assumption, right? An assumption being that if United States has the piece of the pie and puts its money into that pie, right, it will continue investing. The question, of course, is where's the guarantee for sovereign Ukraine under that agreement? Why wouldn't it be transferable to Russian-occupied Ukraine, for that matter? Or where is the guarantee in there that security will follow? Because, right, you guys understand how business works. You don't make investment when you have an unsure thing. And nobody's going to be building any kind of refineries or mines if there's a possibility of a missile attack on that site. So I'm not entirely sure where that security guarantee is. So sans that language, right, a lot of pushback, at least from Ukrainian side, and not just Ukrainian side, comes from that. Again, I'm going to spare you all the colonial violin stuff. That alone is a question mark worth answering. I I don't have an answer for that. All right, what about NATO? Oh, Zelensky, in his cunning self, preemptively yesterday went on to say, okay, I'll resign. Cool, you want to replace me? You remember, because last week he was like, the whole approval rating business, he was like, well, if you want to replace me, it's not going to happen today. And now he says, well, okay. I'm okay with that. Resign in exchange for NATO membership. It might bite him in the butt too, him in his big mouth. But here we are. One thing that, as I said, Europe needs to think hard what they're about to do and think about the direction in which they're going to be developing their next steps at European security, if indeed there are cracks in NATO. Because for Ukraine then too, NATO membership, if NATO crumbles, are just like they are for Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, Poland, Czechia. For them too, it's going to be useless, their membership. So they need to be reconsidering what it actually looks like. And so I'm saying, be careful what you promise in there, buddy. But also, which was very interesting to me to watch the development and conversations in Europe and United States, like nobody kind of talks about Turkey. That bothers me. Turkey is a big, powerful player, and Turkey is actually like has thing or two to say about all of this. So last week, right after the Riyadh meeting between US delegation and Russian delegation, Zelensky was meeting with Erdogan. And Erdogan, one more time, reaffirmed his commitment to security, territorial integrity, and sovereignty of Ukraine. Today, Foreign Minister Lavrov was meeting with his Turkish counterpart, and at the joint meeting, the Turkish counterpart said, we support NATO membership for Ukraine. Lavrov didn't like that. And another very interesting thing about reality of things sitting in is that the Turkish foreign minister also said that we have to understand one fact, that Ukrainians are asking for NATO membership just not for the sake of being NATO member. Duh. It's just to see a security guarantee for their own country. Wow. Okay. Turkey has a lot of cards to play in this situation. With regard to Russia, with regard to Black Sea, with regard to Crimea and its position on Crimea all alone. It also has some strategic interests right now opening up with regard to European Union. I think this would be a place to watch. And Turkey cannot be disregarded in this conversation. So keep an eye out in the next few days and weeks how things unfold. All right. So Ukraine stands, as I said, continues to resist in a stubborn Ukrainian fashion. Ukrainian support for their president has went up. According to the Kyiv International Institute of Sociology, which yours truly uses their results a lot and has a lot of colleagues working there, I have no reason to distrust them, clocked Zelensky at 57% in summer. My other dear colleague from University of Manchester has recently conducted a poll using their own system, their own polling mechanism that they have had in place for some time that they do for academic research. And they clocked it at 63%. Anecdotal evidence also tells me that it's up climbing because, again, nobody gets to this Ukrainian president. But regardless of Zelensky, like I told you, he's not an uncontroversial figure domestically, so please do not make mistake that somehow, right, Zelensky has this overwhelming approval ratings, that everything that he does, everybody claps their hands and goes along. He faces a lot of questions domestically. However, Ukrainians have this saying, this is not the time. And I've heard it all the time. In Ukrainian sounds "не на часі." So anytime the criticism of Zelensky comes in some ways, they say "не на часі." As in, when the war is over, we'll come with questions. There are questions. But most importantly, through all of this, watching the roller coaster ride of Ukrainian public opinion in the last week, yeah, I saw some disappointment. I saw some absolute devastation, disbelief. But what comes through time and again, and Ukrainians keep repeating one thing. 3 days didn't work, 3 years didn't work. And really, from the words so far, reality has not changed on the ground. And for as long as the reality for them doesn't change on the ground, they're going to continue persisting. And they're going to continue to persisting. And right now, the armed forces of Ukraine is the most trusted institution. I can tell you, every conversation that I have with my friends in Ukraine ends with not just glory to Ukraine, but glory to the armed forces. Because Ukrainians realize that their ability to think, to feel, to exist depends upon, yes, weapons supplied from United States and Europe, yes, their unwavering support, but most importantly, from the men and women in the front lines defending their country every single day. And what is also interesting that last week, and again, I don't have exact numbers for that, this is pure hearsay that I hear from the volunteers, that last week donations, as in like crowdsourcing, crowdfunding for the armed forces of Ukraine has gone up. They have never, some of them saying, we have never closed our donation collections this quickly. Like within 24 hours, they are able to get like 1 million hryvnia, which is like what, 1 million hryvnia? It's like 1 hryvnia to 40 hryvnia to $1. Right, so sizable for the country with economy under war. And we also know that the donations have been a remarkable source, and volunteering have been a remarkable source for Ukraine's resistance and sort of its backbone. And it continues, right? So it's not just Ukrainians inside Ukraine also, right? But all over the world, even those 6.5 million outside, even more. One main disappointment, however, and I feel that this is the point that merits reiteration, and this comes from the Alexandra Matvichuk. She's the Nobel Peace Laureate from a couple of years ago. She's the human rights activist and lawyer who's been doing this, documenting transgressions and violations of human rights in Ukraine since the Revolution of Dignity in 2014. So she's been at it for a while, and her efforts been redoubled since the full-scale invasion. And according to her, right, the main disappointment for Ukrainians will be the impunity for Russian war crimes. So take this as a most important message maybe that I can tell you, right? Ukrainians are not offended because somebody offended their president, or because they're not being taken into account, or because somebody's like not invited them to negotiating table, but because the implication of a lot of possible peace deals might be, on one hand, the impunity of the war crimes that have happened, and the impunity for the war crimes that will come. And Ukrainians have known what they are, how they look like, and very well ready to understand what awaits for them when certain peace plans might not take into account Ukrainian side of the story. And just for the reference, I included there for you the United Nations report about the war crimes. And again, to remind you that why United Nations has this access and why there are such reports looping it right back to armed forces of Ukraine was precisely because those were territories that were liberated. That's why we know about them. What's going on under occupation? We can only guess. And what is more, the more time passes under occupation, the less likely we are to uncover what real war crimes went down there to begin with. Like in the city of Mariupol, where new infrastructure is going up, and one of the biggest booming real estate markets in Russia right now is Mariupol. Destroyed Mariupol, Ukrainian Mariupol. Another little tidbit for you about occupation. A bit of evidence that I found out from a source called Ruсь Сидящая. It's a non-governmental organization run by Russians outside of Russia now, the ones that left thanks to Putin. Its acronym would be something like, the translation would be like Russia behind bars type of thing, right? And they look at they monitor violation of human rights, of imprisoned, of prison sentences, of the conditions of the prisons in Russia and so on. According to them, Russia has been closing its jails in Russia. There's only one place where Russia is building prisons and detention centers like crazy, and that is in occupied Ukraine. You can guess the implications there. So I'm afraid I don't have much rosy picture for you on this third anniversary. Besides that, Ukraine resisted, it will resists, it will continue to resist. So these conversations about the last Ukrainians really should be left to Ukrainians at the very end. And just because, you know, I'm in that kind of mood, I thought I'd depress you even further with my favorite quote from one of my favorite poets of the 20th century, from W.H. Auden. He wrote that poem right before the outbreak of World War II. Okay, enough being depressed. Thank you very much. I'm done. I will be more than happy to answer questions.
Thank you, Lena. Once upon a time, I was an instructor at the U.S. Army Intelligence Center in School, Fort Huachuca, Arizona. One of the blocks of instruction I taught was a KGB GRU, fast forward now FSB GRU. The dude in the White House, I will go to my grave believing, is compromised. I would love to know what Putin has on file. Red Square. Number two, here's my concern. If Ukraine gets thrown under the bus by the orange sphincter and the mental midgets in his cabinet, okay? Under this administration, I fear that this would give Putin time to reconstruct his military, and down the road, even if Trump lives this 4 years, that he would launch another offensive. I mean, I don't know your input. I'm so afraid that Ukraine is going to get screwed in the end by this guy and the people in this administration, in his cabinet.
You know, okay, a couple of things. So I have no idea about him being compromised. I have no evidence to point in that direction. Furthermore, what I know about KGB and geotactics, right, that there is element of fear. If you're a president of a freaking United States of a freaking America with nuclear warheads, there should be very little that scares you. So there's a little element of there that I'm not entirely, I don't know, okay? And part of me just doesn't buy that. I also am very hopeful that sellout is not going to be the end of the line here either, because again, if we take this idea of projecting power, of projecting strength, of wanting to see this resolution and not going down entirely as a failure of foreign policy, because that would be. So it's either going to get spun in some remarkable fashion, right, or not. So that's another thing. My bigger fear is that, okay, what we have known about Mr. Trump's first term in office is that despite the fact that he really attempted to look into Putin's eyes and make nice with him and spoke really complimentary with him, it still didn't stop him later of approving the sending lethal weapons to Ukraine. So also, right, so there's this element of unpredictability, but that unpredictability is also what sort of worries me. How long, if there's a bromance, how long will it last before they too come to disagreement with each other? And that could be potentially more dangerous than, them playing nice to each other. Yeah.
Hi there.
Hi.
I have two questions, both hopefully can be answered in a short way. I don't think they're too complicated. The first one is from a military, diplomatic, economic standpoint, however you want to look at it. Why haven't the Ukrainians taken out the Crimea Bridge over the Kerch Strait? I know they attacked it once, maybe a second time, but it's such a vital link. Why haven't they taken it out?
Good question. I want to know the answer to that too.
Okay, that's fine.
I ask that question every day myself.
Okay, well then, good, great minds think alike. The second question is that within all of this recent discussion about U.S. economic development, developing the minerals, et cetera, something that has come up a couple of times, and I did a little bit of reading in it. There's not a lot of information out there, but it appears that the Russians have invited the Chinese in on their side of the line to basically do a lot of the same thing, and a measure of the economic development that you mentioned going on is Chinese businesses and finances. Can you address China's role at this point?
China's role in this point is another very important element that we don't talk about enough, I don't think, in this relationship. I mean, China had interest in Ukraine at the very least prior to 2014, right? So before the Revolution of Dignity had happened, Yanukovych's regime was making overtures to Chinese government, and we know that too, that there was sort of conversations about the rare earth minerals, the shale gas and oil, and of course all of that is in eastern parts of Ukraine. So yeah, China's had its eye on that part of the world for its raw materials and resources, and of course probably with Russia it might have easier ways of dealing than with Ukrainian government. I don't know right now if there are any conversations between Ukrainians and Chinese. I have no idea. If there are, they not discussed. I know, of course, that China is concerned about the just bilateral discussions between the United States and Russia, right? And their take, I mean, their worry would be that if we're looking at Yalta 2.0, division of the world, division of Europe, where are they at that table with their strategic interests? I hope that answers your question.
About as much as you could.
Yeah, about as much as I can, yeah.
Hi there. Thank you for your heavy dose of realism tonight. And I guess my question is, from your standpoint, what does a realistic outcome look like looking forward, despite everything you've talked about tonight? I mean, right now it looks, after 3 years, like a war of attrition. Ukraine has 1/10 of the GDP of Russia. They can just grind, which is interesting. Russia has 1/3 of the GDP of California. So we try to figure out, we think they're so much more powerful, but, not in terms of economic. But Russia also has some face to save in all of this. They're not just going to back out. Europe and the West can give Ukraine all the weapons possible, but only so far, defensive weapons, nothing beyond that. So how does all those pieces work together so this comes out, other than Russia just saying, okay, I'll leave? Because the sanctions haven't worked, the economic sanctions haven't worked.
And they're not going to work if we lift them now.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing is that, right, realistically, there's no end anytime soon. There's no solution anytime soon. And right, if you are to sort of discuss, again, with any kind of realistic expectations, right, if we are going to go that way, we got to figure out, solutions have to come from expectations too, right? What our expectations are on the ground. So if the expectation is to pressure Russia to withdraw, pressure Russia to lose, then there's certain elements that need to be put in place. And one of them would be continued sanctions, upping sanctions, going after the shadow fleet much more, going after the assets, frozen assets, and distributing them to Ukraine in much more meaningful fashion. Ukraine, too, needs to reorganize seriously domestically. I'm not going to stand here and tell you that everything is hunky-dory and, Zelensky is doing a fabulous job. I told you. The Ukrainians have a lot of questions for Zelensky. I do too. With regard to mobilization, with regard to economy, with regard to why is it that Ukraine is still not producing its own rockets at the rate that it can produce? Where are those investments that should have been done in Ukraine? Why is Ukraine not much more self-sustained or partnering with its neighbors and European allies and producing much more weapons? And again, all of those are very valid categories and very valid strategies going after, again, if we wanted, if the goal was to see Russia defeat. What it looks like, how long it takes, I have no idea. Right at this particular juncture, I don't see a solution, or fast solution at all. And setting expectations, I think, is one of the most important things here. And, when you're trying to set expectation that we're going to end this and end it quick, this can be just as dangerous as saying we're going to take as long as it takes without what it means, what that takes, and how long till what it takes.
Hi, Dr. Surzhko-Harned.
Hi, Carlos.
Hi, I'm Carlos. I'm a former student. It's nice to see you all here. I guess rather than a question, I just want to make sure that I synthesize the lecture correctly, or the highlight points. So you mentioned that one of the hypotheses that we can draw is that Trump's foreign policy is trying to cut losses in Ukraine. In a way, and just say like finding a scapegoat, which in this case is Zelensky, and the bad management of the hundreds of billions of dollars, and try to use that as a way to negotiate a friendship with Putin and use all his resources towards maybe the new adversary, which is China. But this makes no sense whatsoever. Like, we're shooting ourselves on the foot. We're losing credibility worldwide. The international order that the United States has built is falling apart. And moving forward to the person over there, maybe hypothesize that Putin has some dirt on Trump. Because even if the approach would be to take a more hawkish approach and more realistic, if you want to call it that way, you shouldn't throw your biggest ally under the bus. And that seems what's going on. So I'm sorry, I'm all over the place, but I guess that's what I got from this lecture, and I'm very worried, honestly.
You're welcome.
That's Dr.
Yeah.
Lena Surzhko-Harned.
I wish I could tell you that I knew what the end result was too. And this goes back again to my previous comment. What is the end goal? Right? And again, if we map out what the end goals are, we can make sort of logical predictions, but end goal seems to be a moving target and very difficult to sort of even formulate. So I'm there with you. Unless this is the entire point of have us all confused and guessing while real magic is happening behind it.
I just have a little question. I was really surprised that big old Russia needed some scrawny, skinny, half-starved North Koreans to come and add to their big, powerful military to help fight this war. What's that all about?
Well,
why would they need North Koreans?
First of all, don't underestimate North Korean infantry. They are very well trained and they've been showing themselves on the battlefield remarkably. And Ukrainian military has time and time said that they are not underestimating North Korean whatsoever. There's a couple of reasons there. Ukraine has served as a training ground, not just for North Korea, but also for Iran. The Iranian drones that are flying and attacking Ukraine every day, that's a training ground. That's testing of technology that can be used elsewhere. Training and battle trying and battle testing in modern warfare, North Korean army is also a good idea. But here's the thing, why in Kursk and why not in Ukraine? Because it's sovereign Russian territory that Russia can claim to be defending from advancing occupiers, rather than whatever they might say and how much Ukrainian territory they can claim in their own constitution. Right, and that also speaks a little bit to hypocrisy, right? They still recognize that they are on Ukrainian territory. Furthermore, using Koreans in that way, it allowed for Russia not to stretch and take their assets from their offensive posts in eastern Ukraine to Kursk. So there's a lot of reasons why mighty Russian military decided to go in that direction.
There was something that I'd read that the North Koreans were killing themselves because they were being thrown into these situations and a lot of them were being killed, or maybe that wasn't true reporting.
I'm not sure in terms of killing themselves. I know that there have been reports about their identities and their bodies being destroyed so they cannot be identified as such for a while. But I'm not entirely sure about killing themselves. I mean, there were some reports also that were floated that some North Korean prisoner of war did not want to be returned. They'd rather stay in Ukrainian.
Food must be better.
I don't know. But again, don't underestimate their infantry. They have shown themselves to be quite effective.
I apologize if you already covered this in the first few minutes, but there's a few things that I've heard pro-Ukrainian commentators be very kind of hopeful about, and I'm wondering if any of these are really going to be successful and help bring a quicker end to the war and a better end for Ukraine. The first one is cutting off the Russian pipeline that goes through Ukraine as of January 1st. The second one is just the raw attrition of the Russian army. And then the other one is the invasion of Kursk, which seems to be really a thorn in Putin's side. But and I have to say, anyone I ask everyone I know, do they know that Ukraine invaded Russia? And they don't. And I find that incredible because they've been there for 6 months, that's not on the news and it's not on people's radar. But do you think any of the three of those are working and are ways that they can really hurt Russia?
Okay, so as you were speaking, I just had a light bulb moment to your question, actually. So, from the Ukrainians' perspective, the best case scenario of how this ends is that Ukraine, however it looks like, I mean it, however it looks like, whatever territory it has, remains a sovereign state. For as long as it remains a sovereign state, however it looks like, it can live to fight another day. So with regard to territories, one of the huge things, the red lines for Ukrainians, right, has been, and I think it will continue, and has a precedent of not accepting de jure the occupied territories as part of Russian constitution. Can then the Kursk territories somehow be used as a bargaining chip? That has been floated as an idea. The interesting part, of course, is that, and here's the catch-22 again, as far as Russian Federation is concerned, Kursk is Russian territory, but so is Luhansk, Donetsk, Zaporizhzhia, and Kherson. And those are, and Crimea, of course. And those are the territories that they have written into their constitution. So as far as they're concerned, for them it will be trading Russian territory for Russian territory. Legalistically, what's their incentive? I honestly don't know. Other things you have asked about.
The pipeline and
the pipeline.
Just the attrition.
Yeah, so the pipeline. My students were shocked when I told them that this entire time Ukraine continued to transfer gas through its territory. And I said, well, yeah, that's part of the agreement that they had despite the bombs falling. I think it's going to take more than pipelines. Did it hurt? It hurt. Yeah, but at the same time, do we now hear a apt rhetoric from Fico and Orban about their necessity and relying on Ukraine's on the transfers of gas and right again selling Ukrainians one more time as that story of disagreeable, non-negotiable, or difficult to negotiate, breaking their agreements, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm not sure how much it's sort of two ends. And in terms of war of attrition, I'm not sure. What was your point there?
Just the raw losses that we've been hearing about in the Russian troops, approaching 1 million casualties possibly this year.
Yeah, and I think there, like I said before, for as long as Russian president believes that his economy can withstand the losses, I don't think it's a matter of human life losses. But for as long as it can withstand the losses and they continue to wage war, it will continue.
Okay, first of all, just wanted to tell you, I agree with you across the board. I've been hanging on every word you said tonight, and I have background in policy analysis and European policy. With regards to Turkey, I think you really hit on something here tonight. Turkey's military might is something that's often overlooked. I mean, my personal belief is if Turkey really wanted to, they could come tomorrow. And this is economic and trade considerations aside. Turkey could step in tomorrow, cross the Black Sea, and side with one side or the other and put an end to this. Now, that's just my personal take on it. So I don't think Turkey's involvement is taken into consideration enough. So what I'd like to ask you is, and I'm asking you to speculate. I applaud you for looking at the situation, limiting your analysis to what we see and what's observable. I'm going to ask you to take it a little bit further. I am going to ask you to speculate. What do you think Turkey wants? What do you think, and aside from NATO, aside from their integration with NATO, just economics and market aside, what do you think Turkey's objectives are? And do you think they're going to eventually press them further?
I think Turkey has an opportunity, absolutely. And like I said, Turkey has an opportunity right now politically, a huge political capital that Turkey has, just like it did at the time of Syrian refugee crisis, to put Europe on defensive and put Europe in sort of a position of remember how Turkey been wanting to be part of the European Union for so long, and how much the rhetoric from the European Union always been, for the lack of a better word, condescending. And Turkey had pushed maximum advantage with the Syrian refugee crisis to score major political and economic gains out of that situation.
And Greece would have to fall into the ocean too for that to have ever happened.
But here we are, right? There are opportunities for Turkey, and they're very carefully, I think, weighing their stratagems. Will they take it?
That's going to happen.
I think, again, I hate to speculate because we are in the moment of phenomenal volatility, right? And they are watching what United States is doing. And what they are saying now already speaks to me that they are taking that step. I mean, back in Ukrainian membership, inviting Zelensky to Ankara in the time when, right, there is a meeting going on in Saudi Arabia, a meeting to which Zelensky was kind of hoping to go to, and Ankara giving him a way out, really, right, when it became very clear that this was not going to happen. I think they are taking those steps. What they're going to do next, again, I don't want to speculate, but I think they are a place to watch. And you know what? Ask my student. I don't do in counterfactuals, and they hate me for it too.
So we have time for one more question, and that would be you.
I was wondering what you think about if there were elections for any reason, under pressure, whatever, say a year from now, do you think that Zelensky would win? And if not, is there a slate of strong, multiple candidates who would be good for Ukraine who might win if it wasn't him? And what do you think is the risk that Ukraine could end up with a pro-Russian president at the next election?
And here
And
you are
and then-
forcing me to speculate again.
It is speculation, but I'm just wondering what your thoughts are. And also on this next one, this morning I was listening to a call-in show where people call in from both sides. Two people called in from the conservative side and started out with, everyone knows that Ukraine is the most corrupt country in the world. Now, I know that all countries have corruption, including ours, and that Ukraine did have a serious problem with it 10, 15 years ago, but I was under the impression that a lot of inroads have been made, and although there may still be some, that a lot of improvement has been made. And I'm just wondering what your reading is on that, on the current, perception of corruption in Ukraine.
So let me put it this way. Ukrainians are very well aware of that perception of Ukraine as a corrupt country. In last 10 years, there have been some serious work done on countering and dealing with reporting corruption, prosecuting corruption, and so on. The question right now for Ukrainians, though, is that the robustness of civil society is still in place, right? And I cannot underestimate it or overstate it. That whistleblowing is a very real thing. The court and the special body that deals with anti-corruption efforts is also there. At the times of war, where Ukraine finds itself right now, dealing with corruption is also problematic. However, to the degree to which the story of Ukraine's corruption, I don't know, Zelensky having yachts and selling weapons on the side, and that is, of course, highly exaggerated or, right, has no truth to it. In the election stuff, I think your point about pro-Russian candidate, pro-Russian politician is a very valid concern. Of course, in the reality of Ukraine, given all the atrocities, given the war crimes, and et cetera, that candidate will not openly be pro-Russian. Just like in Georgia, right? They not necessarily position themselves as pro-Russian. It will be a pragmatic, realistic candidate who will say, peace at all cost. And they might do well, actually. And the worry is that, it's a very real possibility. I hate to remind folks that Zelensky received his 73% of electoral vote because he too was a peace candidate. Pragmatic, peaceful, who also wanted to look into Putin's eyes and we're going to stop shooting and all live happily ever after. In terms of Zelensky winning, I have no idea. If he makes it to second round, depending on who he's running against. But in a year's time, again, you're forcing me into speculation. Right now, there's no really candidates that came up forward. Right. So there are these, again, my dear sweet colleagues who do sociology and do sociological kind of polling. They throw some names out there, but none of the candidates that they run for polling, like former general, or rather the former commander-in-chief, General Zaluzhny, who's now a ambassador of Ukraine to United Kingdom. He's wildly popular. And they throw his name out there in the polls, in the pollsters, and he comes up like super popular, like up there, even better, do polling better than Zelensky. But here's the thing, Zaluzhny never expressed any desire to run. So there is really no campaign to speak about and speak of to really pick the candidates that can be viable, because none of them really expressed an interest. And I think overall, the way that Ukrainians feel about it, yes, elections should be held in proper time when the fighting is over. Up until that moment, conversations about elections can be dangerous. Furthermore, I would venture a guess that because Zelensky has promised himself to be a one-term candidate, his desire to run again might actually come and bite him. And not to mention, again, like I told you, Ukrainians have a lot of questions for him, including, I'm not even going to voice them, but a lot of questions that he might not be able to account for come election cycle.
Can you go into any of the problems with Zelensky?
No, I think I named you just enough. Question of mobilization. Question of why there is not a unified government yet with the opposition. Ukrainians are definitely sick and tired of the fact that their streamlined news coverage, despite there's been plurality of independent resources, there's still sort of a very streamlined TV coverage at the very least. They have questions, of course, about the state of wartime economy. Why isn't Ukraine full-on militarized economy moving forward in producing its own weapons and rather relying so much on foreign buys? There's questions also about Zelensky's handling of his presidential advisor in his office, Mr. Yermak. Ukrainians don't like him. He's not elected. He seems to have a lot of power in that office, and they don't particularly appreciate that either. All right, so he's head of his presidential administration. Now, that's a huge question for many Ukrainians.
Thank you so much for your time and for trying to shed light on this. We appreciate you.
My pleasure. Thank you for your questions.